The Gaza ceasefire is collapsing. Everything we've been warning about in the last few videos, talking about Trump's 20-point plan, is coming to a head. It's getting kind of crazy down there. We're going to get into all the details in this video. On October 10th, the ceasefire deal went into effect. And at that time, the IDF withdrew to what is known as the yellow line. Everything behind the yellow line on the IDF side, meaning in the direction of Israel, as you see on your screen, is area controlled by the IDF. And on the other side of the yellow line towards the sea, that is the area controlled by Hamas. From that moment forward, humanitarian aid started flowing into the Hamas-controlled areas of the yellow line, and the IDF had full control of all the areas on the Israel side of the yellow line. And it's important to note that there was significant population on both sides of the line. This is the population of Gazans who did not want to return to the main population centers, who did not want to live under Hamas, and have instead chosen to live in IDF-controlled territory. Before we go on, be sure to go into the description of this video and download the free ebook that's available there. It is a collection of articles, of columns that I've written and that really provide my analysis since the beginning of the October 7th war. And it'll really give you a window into what we've been through since the war began. So go ahead and download that. Now back to the video. And now on the Israel side of the yellow line, from the beginning of the ceasefire, the IDF Combat Engineering Corps started destroying the tunnel infrastructure, the Hamas terror infrastructure, and also searching for the remains of hostages that they had intelligence that said were being held in that area, including the remains of Hadar Golden. That's an Israeli soldier who was killed in 2014, and his body has been held, his remains have been held by Hamas there ever since. On October 19th, shortly after the ceasefire went into effect, Hamas terrorists popped out of a tunnel in Rafah, which is on the IDF side of the yellow line, and fired an anti-tank missile at Israeli combat engineers, killing 2 Israeli soldiers. The Israeli army at that point responded, and it looked like the ceasefire might be blowing up. But by the end of the day, the ceasefire was back in effect. Now, what this attack meant is that there were still Hamas terrorists in tunnels on the IDF-controlled side of the yellow line. Now, a U.S. official told the Times of Israel last week that shortly after that, the Egyptian and Qatari mediators told Hamas that they had 24 hours to evacuate its fighters from the Israeli side of the yellow line or risk being exposed to IDF fire. Now, it turns out that there are actually dozens of Hamas terrorists who are now trapped in a tunnel in Rafah. Now, it was originally thought to be between 100 and 200 terrorists, but now intelligence has come in that it's a much smaller number. These terrorists living in the tunnel in Rafah have food and supplies and weapons, but their supplies are reportedly dwindling. They're completely surrounded by the IDF, and reportedly they are somewhat cut off from Hamas in the rest of the Gaza Strip. Now, according to the IDF, the terrorists who are holed up in this tunnel have 2 options. Either surrender, and that means going into IDF custody, that means being arrested, interrogated, etc., or they could fight it out and be killed. Defense Minister Israel Katz tweeted just the other day, quote, "Israel's policy in Gaza is clear. The IDF is acting to destroy tunnels and eliminate Hamas terrorists without any restrictions within the yellow area under our control. The goal, alongside the return of all the hostage casualties, is to disarm Hamas of its weapons and demilitarize Gaza." And we talked about this in a few previous videos, that the demilitarization of Gaza, the disarming of Hamas, is a part of the Trump 20-point plan that is not really clear. Go back and watch that video we made about that, how there's no real plan to disarm Hamas. Just to review, the Americans are giving mixed messages. Some of Trump's advisors are saying that this is supposed to be done by an Arab military that is put together to come into Gaza. Trump implied that it might be done by the Israelis, but then Secretary of State Rubio said that no, it can't be done by the Israelis because that would mean the end of the ceasefire. No one really has a plan for the disarming of Hamas. But Israel is saying, well, on our side of the yellow line, we have full operational freedom, and we are going to destroy the Hamas infrastructure, destroy the tunnels, and eliminate any Hamas operatives who are there who are not supposed to be there. They had their chance to get to the Hamas side of the yellow line. Now that they're here, they are fair game. Now, the U.S. right now is pressing Israel to allow the terrorists in the tunnel to come out of the tunnel and have safe passage to the other side of the yellow line, meaning without getting arrested. Israel is refusing. They're saying no. They had their chance to evacuate. They violated the ceasefire. They killed a few of our soldiers after the ceasefire began. There are still bodies of 7 Israeli hostages that have not been returned, and Israel knows that Hamas knows where at least some of them are. So the Israelis are saying, why should we allow safe passage for these Hamas terrorists who have been they've been in violation of the ceasefire. They killed Israeli soldiers, and Hamas in general is violating the ceasefire. Israel also says that among the terrorists in the tunnel are some of the remaining senior Hamas members. Israel wants to take them into custody or eliminate them as they are responsible for the deaths of Israelis. So you might ask yourself, why doesn't Israel just blow up the tunnel that they're in and kill them that way? You know, what difference does it make? There's no live hostages in the tunnels anymore to be worried about. Well, now we get into the political calculations. You see, Israel doesn't want to be the ones to officially and dramatically end the ceasefire. And an action like that, blowing up the tunnels, going in there with full firepower and just killing all of the Hamas terrorists who are in there, would be very much a resumption of the war. That's how it would be understood. That's how it would be interpreted. And Israel Israel also still wants the remains of whatever hostages haven't yet been returned, and fears that if it blows up the ceasefire by blowing up the tunnel that these terrorists are in, they may never get back the remains of the final hostages who haven't been returned. The Israelis, of course, don't want to get on the bad side of President Trump and the Trump administration by being the ones who ended the ceasefire that the Trump administration is still insisting is working. Now, you might ask, why is the U.S. pressuring Israel to release these terrorists to the Hamas side? Why is that their position? Well, this goes back to the problem of disarming Hamas. As I mentioned earlier, and again, as I laid out extensively in earlier videos, the big flaw in the Trump 20-point plan is that the disarmament of Hamas is mentioned in the plan as something that will happen, that Hamas will lay down its weapons, but there is no actual plan to disarm Hamas. So the U.S. sees this current situation with these Hamas terrorists stuck in a tunnel who want to get out as an opportunity to show that the deal is working. If these terrorists were granted amnesty to come out of the tunnel and not get arrested and not get killed and go over to the Hamas side, they would, of course, have to give up their weapons in the process. No one is suggesting that they'd be allowed to come out of the tunnels and cross over into Hamas-controlled territory with their weapons. So think about it. If these terrorists come above ground and they give up their weapons and are granted amnesty to go over to the Hamas side, the U.S. sees this as an opportunity to claim that the plan is working and that the 20-point plan is moving forward as written. You see, point 6 in the 20-point plan states as follows: once all hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. Members of Hamas who wish to leave Gaza will be provided safe passage to receiving countries. So these terrorists wouldn't be going to another country, but this situation of Hamas terrorists coming out of the tunnel, laying down their weapons and being given amnesty to go over to the Hamas side would look a lot like the implementation of this point in the plan. So the Trump administration could point to that and say, oh, all these questions about disarmament, take a look. Here it is. This is exactly what we had in mind. Now, the fact that we know of this group of Hamas terrorists in a tunnel in Rafah also raises the possibility, the suspicion on the Israeli side that there may be other groups of terrorists in other tunnels in IDF-controlled areas. Now, this complicates things in another way. According to the 20-point plan in the area controlled by the IDF, where, again, there's hundreds of thousands of Gazans who've chosen to live in the IDF-controlled area. Some of them have allegiance to these anti-Hamas militias that have taken some measure of control in those areas under the auspices of the Israelis. And in that area, in the next stage of the plan, according to the Trump 20-point plan, there's supposed to be services and temporary housing and humanitarian aid that is provided to the Gazans on that side. Again, those who don't want to live under Hamas. Here's point 17 of the plan. Quote, in the event that Hamas delays or rejects this proposal, the above, meaning the other points in the plan, including the scaled up aid operation, will proceed in the terror-free areas handed over from the IDF to the ISF. Now, there's no ISF yet. There's no International Stabilization Force. But the idea of this clause in the plan is that in the areas under IDF control, even if Hamas is not disarming and is still in control in part of the Gaza Strip, in the part of the Gaza Strip that's not under Hamas control, we can already move to the next stage of the plan where, as I said, temporary housing is built and ramped up aid is distributed to the people. This gives incentive to more Gazans to want to be in the IDF-controlled area, and it starts implementing a better life for those Gazans. Now, if there's still Hamas terrorists in various tunnels on the IDF side who are going to pop out of their tunnels and attack soldiers, this obviously complicates the situation. So to sum up, here's where things stand right now. Israel is in a bit of a dilemma. On the one hand, it does not want to allow Hamas's ceasefire violations to go unchecked, and granting amnesty and safe passage to these terrorists in the tunnel would mean that there are no consequences for their grave violations of the ceasefire, including killing Israeli soldiers after the ceasefire went into effect. But the Israelis also do not want to signal to Washington that Israel's blowing up the ceasefire or that it's not being cooperative with American interests. Now, the U.S. at the same time sees this whole situation as an opportunity to show the world that the deal is working. Hamas terrorists coming out of tunnels, laying down their weapons, and being granted amnesty and safe passage into Hamas-controlled territory is a good look. But meanwhile, from Hamas's side, there's actually no indication that the terrorists in the tunnel even want to surrender their weapons. And past history shows that Hamas usually go down fighting to the death. So this is the stalemate that we're currently in. We are watching this very closely. And bottom line is that all the problems that we pointed out with the disarmament of Hamas and how this deal is working and how Hamas never really agreed to it, it's all coming to a head as we speak.